Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about some fraudulent heroes. We're going to be talking about the cosmology and planes as our main topic, but also about a con man. All this and more today here on Rise of the GM. Well, guys, it is good to be back. I'm not even going to lie to you today. Adam and I, we're hitting it kind of seat of our pants. Lots been going on here today. Lots been going on there today. We both have kids in session. So if for some reason there's a small knock at the door or I look distracted and then a young man walks into this screen, that's my son. He's with me today. And then I think Adam has his kids as well.
Yeah,
and it's just, this is what happens when you're an awesome dad GM, right?
Yeah.
You have these times. So, we are here today. We're going to be talking about our encounter starter, like always, in just a moment. And then we're going to hit some cosmology and planes today and then end with our NPC. It's going to be a good time. And you know what? We don't even know what we're going to say, but it's going to be so dang awesome. You're going to listen to this one twice, I think. Maybe not twice. All right. So I got to actually get to I'm the one reading the encounter today, and we are talking about some fraudulent heroes. Remember, this is the encounter starters, that just something to spark your idea of things you can throw into your campaign. And so this one's called The Price of Glory and Fame. So it starts off, a bag of bloody clothing is dropped off in town with a ransom note attached, and the garments are recognized as belonging to a famous party of adventurers who disappeared weeks ago, right? So the town knew about them, and now here's their bloody clothes. The party was last seen by the townsfolk fending off a vicious pack of monsters who were stealing their goods. So these monsters were coming to the town, looting everything, stealing everything, and the last time they saw these adventurers, the townsfolk saw them fighting the monsters. So that's a good thing, right? People around town can be heard lamenting the fate of these brave souls. There's much to talk about in that epic battle that ended when one of the adventurers chucked the bomb into the fray and smoke explosion. And when the smoke cleared, monsters were gone. So were the adventurers, right? Or no, the adventurers. Anyway, townsfolk, to them, the adventurers are heroes. In truth, though, they're frauds, right? The adventurers and the monsters worked together to stage the whole scene. The townspeople don't know that. First, the monsters harassed the towns, and then afterward, the party arrived and offered to save the day for a fee that was equal to the task of rescuing the entire populace. So this is no small fee. They bargained a high price, but the people gave everything they could because it was their town, right? And the con was almost a complete success. However, even after taking the money and making a clean escape, right? So they got the money after the monsters, after the bomb that killed all the monsters, they got the money and they left. Even after making that clean escape, the swindlers decided they weren't done swindling. Party of adventurers attempted to cut out the monsters' take. So they were supposed to split this with the monsters. That was the deal. They didn't. Some of the party members escaped with the money, but the monsters were able to capture a few of them and holding them for ransom in a cave outside of town. A hooded man approaches the PCs. This is the way this is all going to start. A hooded man approaches the PCs and asks for their help. He is one of the adventurers who escaped the grasp of the monsters, but instead of fleeing with his share of the money, he wants the PCs to help him rescue the other adventurers. So he must have some loyalty there, right, to these people. And he promises a reward to sweeten the pot. The hooded man asks that they set out immediately, wanting to get there. In traveling to the cave, the PCs are then ambushed by monsters that seem to have been tracking the hooded man. The hooded man immediately kills the creatures that look like the creature that looks like it's about to talk about the deal between the monsters and the other adventuring party. A torn and bloodstained piece of paper is found in one of the creatures, somewhere on one of the creatures, written in a pidgin of the creature's language and the common language. The message is hard to read, but the PCs can make out things like money, town, attack, maybe a date and time, planned run on smoke flash. Okay, so they could start putting together what happened here. PCs reach the cave, which should be as labyrinthine as the adventure requires. In the deepest section, the adventurers that the first adventuring party is tied up and the monster's leader is gloating over them. If the PCs confront him, he asks for a ransom and warns the PCs not to underestimate his intelligence or betray him like the other adventurers did. The hooded man's going to jump in and try and prevent the monster leader from saying too much. And so in this whole thing, the PCs might find the monster, might fight the monster leader and then find out more about the adventurer's treachery. The adventurers will attempt to bribe or kill them to keep them quiet. They don't want this to get out to the town or to the other towns that they might try to pull this on. Alternately, the PCs might pay the ransom and be given the adventurers, still tied up, with the option to blackmail them or do as they please to them. No matter what, the adventurers are full of resentment and will do anything to keep their treachery hidden. So you got these fraudulent adventurers who came in and made a deal with monsters, and they're basically fleecing these towns, and then they're supposed to split it with the monsters, but they pushed their luck a little too far.
Yeah.
And now your adventurers have been called into this. Your party has been called into this. What do you think you would do with this kind of encounter if you were running it, and this was what you decided to do?
I get a little, this is like me talking into the way this is written. Like I got lost at times reading this and trying to remember, okay, I got to remember that some of this stuff is not known to the players, right. Like there's a lot in here that's actually what's going on in the background. And you know that as the GM, but the players don't see that until it's kind of revealed. And I do think that that's like super important to remember that stuff. And the thing I'm kind of working through right now is like where this actually gets kind of engaged with your players. Like, is it they come into a town and the town's like, oh man, our awesome adventurers that came in here and were so heroic have disappeared. Are they all distraught about that? Because I think there is a place to play that up and like see that. I was joking beforehand, but I have Music Man written down here. And the reason for that is that idea of like, it's like a con man coming into this place and like is now beloved by the town by the end of this. And then revealed to, oh, he actually doesn't know what he's doing. These aren't real heroes, kind of thing. And I think there's a thing to play that like tension up too. But going back, is it like they've come into the town and realized, oh, these people are missing now and they need rescued? Or are you on the road or in some tavern and the guy comes up hooded and says, I need your help. My friends have been captured. So that's the thing I'm kind of like working through. And I don't know. How did you read that when you looked at this?
So as I read the whole thing and then I kind of went to piece it together in my head. And I think if I were doing this, if I were running this game, it would be you come into a town and maybe the first night you're in the tavern, the bard's singing the spectacular battle that ended with a bomb being thrown in the midst and destroying all of the hated monsters. And they would probably enlarge it and enhance the story a good bit and be like all jovial. Everybody would be like super happy. Yeah. And when you ask about it, they're like, yeah, this just happened. And these monsters were taken care of by whatever the name of the group is.
Right.
Then in my mind, as you're waking up the next day or getting ready to plan your next move of whatever you've been doing, that's when somebody comes in with these bloody clothes and a note saying that there's a ransom. And then they're like, these guys have done so much good. You've got to help us. And so they're kind of pleading on one hand. But then at the same time, this hooded man comes and he says, hey, I need you to come with me. Because I'm trying to remember in that note, I'm trying to look here. Did the note say where they were being held or just we demand a ransom? So, I mean, you might have to make this up as a DM.
Right.
And so I guess in my mind, the monsters want the money dropped off somewhere and they'll return the adventurers. Well, then this hooded man comes and maybe sits at your table and he's like, I need your help. I know where they're being held, and it's like, oh, we don't have to just drop off money and wait for them to be returned.
Right, right.
Can you help me go rescue them? And
Yeah.
and so as you're going, you don't know anything about the duplicitous nature of these people, and you're attacked by monsters, and the monsters start to say something, and this guy like kills it.
Yeah.
and he does it in the name of, oh, I just hate them so much after what they did to my fellow adventurers.
Right.
But eventually you get to the cave, and that's when the whole confrontation happens, and then the guy at some point somehow they're going to say, we were supposed to get part of this money, and these guys double betrayed us. And
Right.
so at that point, then I think that's where, for me, I would have to think through, I'm going to give my players freedom here. I'm going to give my
Yes.
players the freedom to either say, hey, you know what, you got yourself into this mess, you deal with it. Or no, we're not paying the ransom. Or yes, we are paying the ransom, even though we shouldn't,
Right.
I would suppose they would have the ransom with them, meaning that somehow they let the town know, hey, we found out where they're being held. Give us the ransom, we'll take it and help free your adventurers. But then they get there, and then they have to decide, do we
Right.
keep the money? Do we take the money back to the town? Do
Right.
we pay the money and get these adventurers and then do something to them? Do we take them back to the town to serve justice? But the thing is, I don't want to lay out the possibilities. I don't want to say you could do this, this, or this. I would just like to,
Yeah.
for me, the favorite part of this would be the decision. And so I would be
Absolutely.
like, oh, here's what happened. And then just sit there quietly and then watch them begin to debate among themselves. Because there's going to be somebody who's like, well, they got themselves into this mess. And there's going to be somebody who's like, oh no, we're good. We've got to save everybody, even
Right.
these adventurers, and watch that whole thing unfold.
Yeah.
So for me, that's where the fun would begin, in that conundrum, once you're in the cave down deep.
Absolutely.
And all of this is found out. And then you got the hooded guy standing there who looks like he's watching you. Do I take off? Do I run? Maybe he's standing by the door watching to see which way you look like you're going to lean,
Right.
like he's ready to make his escape.
Which way are the tides going there? Yeah.
Right. And so then it comes down to, if you help them, what do you do for the town? How does this play? Do you let them go? Are these going
Right.
to be adventurers you meet again later somewhere who said they were going to stop, but now they're pulling the same thing again in another town that you go
Right.
down the road? Maybe like, I don't know, 6 sessions later, you run into this group again,
Yeah, yeah,
and you're like, you guys are still doing this. You've got to stop, or
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I like the that kind of the way you're thinking about, like with the town. I like that. I even wonder about, like, if they're traveling, they're going across country and they're even walking through town, visiting towns, and it's like, oh yes, these adventurers came in and helped us with, you're like hearing stories even
Right.
prior
Several
to
towns in
that.
advance, all of these heroic deeds.
Right.
And you're like, man, these guys must
Well,
be even
they're-
more awesome than us.
It's like they're taking care of everything we were supposed to do, So
I don't think there's a PC party that would say that, though, that they're more
be
awesome
like,
than us. Not likely.
But my favorite part of this was, like, it was what you just said, was the end of the fact that there are options. I said, love the possible endings there, because that is really great to have that aspect of, here is a situation. I'm going to sit back and you're going to make a choice, kind of thing. And we're going to play from there. But there are a lot of possibilities there. And I think that's a really cool thing to put your players, your table, your PCs into, of like, what kind of party are you going to be, and I've had some of those in the recent game where I had no idea, and it was definitely like, do what you're going to do, figure it out together, and we're going to move from there. So that's been cool to see that.
And very often when I run games, especially when I was first starting, there was one adventuring party solving all the problems in the world. And so I do think it's kind of neat to have this idea that there are other adventuring parties out there, and some of them are good and some of them aren't. And so I think it's fun to mix in, like you said, like have, several towns in advance. You keep hearing about these, and so you're like, oh, they must be something. And then you find out they're not, and they're bad.
Right.
And I love that idea of continuing to meet them down the road if they decide to let them go in any way, even with stern warning. These guys can like seem so recalcitrant. They can be like, yeah, hey man, we see the error of our ways. We're going to stop. But then they do it again, and they're still
Right.
doing it because that's who they are. But then at the same time, have other parties who are like kind of competing for like heroic nature in the world with you. I think we've had some campaigns where we're not the only, what was the Wanderers and who were the other ones?
Travelers.
The Travelers and the Wanderers, right? And so I think we were the Wanderers and they were the Travelers. And we were both fighting for glory. And yeah, we didn't like them because they were actually good and good at what they did. Maybe we were fighting so that we were the best, and so having a group like that and having a group that's out there causing trouble and just having these other adventuring groups, it's a fun thing to do as a GM and for your party.
Yeah, I like the idea of, and we've talked about it before, but just the fact that like time does pass in the game, and it's not a video game where everybody's just standing around waiting to deliver their lines until you get there, kind of thing. So when you choose, well, we're just going to walk away from this. Well, somebody's going to probably fight and something's going to happen, or we're going to save these adventurers and just let them go. Well, what are they doing? I mean, that's the thing I think it's worth like thinking of is what are they actually doing in the world while we're doing we're over here. Are they re-equipping and now they're doing the hustle again, or are they now good guys, or like what is that kind of thing? And
this also gives you a chance to play with conceptions of monsters, good and bad, right?
Yes,
so these monsters, obviously your players are going to want to like attack and kill them because they're monsters after all, right? But if they say, hey, we didn't really do anything. Yeah, we stole a few things from the town and we'll give those back. Maybe they say that. But we didn't really attack anybody. We didn't do anything. We just kind of made a deal here to get some extra money. They were the ones who brought the idea to us. And we're like, okay. And so then you have to decide, okay, do we just like kill all these monsters in this cave? Or do we like let them go about their way and what can result from that? And yeah, I think kind of breaking that myth of all monsters are bad. I think we've talked about this in our previous. So what makes a monster? What makes somebody a monster? Right. Who's the more monster here, the party or the monsters who they were making this deal with? So all good stuff that you can drop into your campaign, an encounter that can help you stem out into other areas down the road of your campaign, or it can be very self-contained, however you want to do it. With that, we're going to move to our main topic of the day, and we have no idea where this one's going to go, and we've said that before. One of these days, we're going to have a show that just flops. There's going to be like absolutely nothing to talk about. We're just going to sit here. There's going to be crickets. We're going to be like,
it's going to be the big gulps, huh?
Big gulps, huh?
Well,
so
see you later.
Cosmology and planes and more. Oh my. What are we talking about here, Adam?
Yeah, just kind of talking, in terms we're in this world building series, and this is a piece of that. I think it's worth looking into. And when we talk about like, the planes, we can think of like the like prime material plane is kind of generally, if we want to use those terms. Again, this is kind of fitting into the more D&D style of terminology. So it depends on what game you're playing, kind of thing too, and just know that. But prime material plane, is typically what or maybe our worlds are on. But then you have things maybe like the ethereal plane or the fire plane or the water plane, or these primordial planes of different things. And so that's like a piece of the universe, that your game is in. And the cosmology, kind of how those things connect together. And then I think like even like these deities in our fantasy games, or these gods that have powers within the world, those are all things that like kind of connect into this. And I think it's worth thinking of in your game, but also knowing like and kind of tempering that of if I was actually able to keep my party just like in the back streets of the city, it may come up, but I may not need to know like where the fire plane and the ethereal plane overlap and how you can get between them. And like, I think that's an important thing to remember too when in our planning is what's the scope of the game. And it may be nice to know like, oh, well, some of these people in the back alleys are worshiping whatever. and that could like play a role in this game. But I may not need to know like how the cosmos work if I'm keeping it pretty urban. But as we kind of bring the scope out where it gets more epic, more heroic, those kind of things, I think it gets a little more important to know those, especially when you get like really powerful magic people who can start walking between the planes, and things like that.
Right.
Like it gets real, there. And I think it's worth like knowing at least a little bit how that works. I think a lot of the principles stay the same. We've talked about in just world building, even Matthew, you had that illustration. You talked about how like a video game renders, and it's like the whole game is not rendered out, this where you're at is rendered. And I think that's like a good principle to think in terms of this too. But I thought it was worth having a conversation, about how we've used that and like why we see that to be of importance. But I did just kind of want to like disclaim that to begin with, of you may be playing a game, Ascending GMs, where it doesn't matter all that much. And if you have like some broad strokes, you're going to be in a good place. But it may be a thing where you're like, no, I want to do like planar jumping. This is the game, is to go between these things, and that's, you're going to need a little more detail in that. So, any thoughts
Yeah.
kind of initially on that, Matthew?
When you first start as a GM, I think it's like anything. So when you're a child and you're first learning to draw, you start by you put your paper over top of a picture and you trace. And nobody in like art would be like, oh, they're creating art. But you have to like begin to learn coordination of your hand and begin to learn what kinds of poses and things you can draw. Later, you will have it to the side and you will kind of look at that and draw what you see. And then at some point you get good enough that you begin to draw stuff just out of your head. That's kind of the same with GMing, right? So you start GMing and you're just kind of tracing what is in this module. And so you may use whatever they have in there. And then at some point you begin to kind of look at other games going on and you're like, okay, I'm going to do something like what he's doing because that's cool. And then at some point you get to where you're making games and plots and stuff out of your head, just like an artist. And then you become a true GM artist. But in all of that, I think most of us start off, unless it's in the module that we're looking at, there's planar stuff. Most of us, our planar knowledge has to do with here and not here.
Yeah.
And so, you're using what is that spell where you shoot and it's like all the colors of the rainbow and you roll to see what happens on it?
Prismatic spray.
Prismatic spray.
Yeah.
One of those is you go to another dimension, right?
Right.
When I first started doing this and I would roll that number and Eric would be sent to another dimension, I didn't have another dimension in mind. He was just not here. So unfortunately for Eric, whenever that happened, he was just sitting there watching the rest of us play until he could come back, which seemed to happen a lot.
Yeah.
For Eric. But anyway, that was the extent of my planar knowledge. My planar knowledge was you're here or you're somewhere else that we're not thinking about, and you just sit there. Mm-hmm. Unless I knew it was going to be like, oh, this is something fire. And then the extent of that was, oh yeah, the hole opens and fire pours out, and it's super hot. If you go in there, you're going to die pretty quick. That kind of thing. That was the extent of my planar knowledge. Then as I got further in my on my GM road, I began to kind of, look around, and somebody would talk about like, oh, the plane of the Fae. And I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of fun to like, not just think about it's there, but like, let's have my characters go in, and while they're in there, they're going to have an encounter. So what would they encounter in Fae, and what would the rules be? Blah, blah, blah. And then the same thing with maybe, when I first started in, what's the one where you got to have a sword that has ghost touch to hit it? What's the ethereal plane?
Ethereal, yeah.
And so if I was going to have somebody go into the ethereal plane, what kinds of things would they encounter? What would that be like? And what would it be like to be in the ethereal plane? These ethereal things come to our plane and you can't always hit them unless you have a ghost touch weapon.
Right.
But what would happen if you went there? And so I got that. And then I got to where I was making up some bigger scope of planar adventures, in that, like with this last one, I talked about us going to Occipitus, the 400 and whatever level of hell. They went to this plane, and you guys spent a good amount of time on this plane, and you encountered a lot of environment and each other and that sort of stuff. So it's the same as, you start little here and other, and then you
Mm,
get a little more, and you get a
yeah.
little more, and then at some point you're going to start thinking about like how do all of these cosmologies stack? You know, where are
Right.
they in relation to one another, or is that even fruitful to think about it like
Right.
that?
Yeah. 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 I think it's really, you mentioned like modules and things. And if we're thinking like strictly like planar, I think there's a place for us to like create totally, but there's a lot made, and if you want to use like the official stuff, like there's a lot out there, more than actually I will say I have not read all that. I get my mind kind of twisted sometimes when I'm thinking about that stuff. But there's a lot of just like official content that you can
Right.
make
And
use
there
of.
are
Whether,
some
yeah,
GMs who love
hmm,
the idea of cosmologies
yeah,
and like they love to read all of that. And then that
hmm,
plays into their game a lot more. And,
yeah,
you know, you may be one of those people from the very beginning. You get that, you know, that book about cosmologies and planes and you begin to just read it because it's so
yeah,
interesting to you. And then, of course, that's going to seep in to your game a lot more than
absolutely,
it does
yeah.
to someone like mine, where it was like, not until the prismatic spray happened did I even think about planes.
Yeah. Are there things like in past games for you or current game, Matthew, that like kind of fits into that realm of just like planar things or other worlds, or even like, we're kind of bringing that in with even like the way deities or things like that work. Like, how's that kind of played a role in your games?
Well, like I said, most of my games, especially starting out, were not too cosmology centered. We
Right.
were on the material plane 99.9% of the time, and there was an occasional burst where you got sent somewhere else.
Yep.
This last campaign, The Dormant Mind, where I had you guys go into Occipitus, it's a lot more planar. But the problem here is you guys haven't encountered it all yet, so I
Right.
can't
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
talk about it on here. It's
Yeah.
top secret, classified.
Hmm.
This is the problem when you're a GM who takes too long to get your stories told, because I do. But
Mm,
there is more planar in this one, and it was from the beginning. Planar was part of the story in this one, and it plays a part in the ending of this one that
right.
you
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
shall not at this time know. But there was
Yeah.
places that you did run into. Yeah, Josh is reminding us right now. He was in that game, and he's talking about like the Fey realm. You guys did
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
You went through the Fey realm for a while there.
Mhm.
You did go to Occipitus,
Right.
but there's like a lot more that you
Hmm.
have not yet
Hmm.
encountered. That's
Yeah.
just something for you guys to look forward to who are in my game. And those of you who aren't, maybe someday I can talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Right. But other than that, I can't say that the different realms have played a ton in my games.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's the thing, I think, like, we're probably kind of both coming more on that side of the continuum where like I've played some games that were like they were planar oriented, and it was super fun. And I think that's, again, it's just like, what is the scope of what you're wanting to do, kind of thing. And it is a different feel. I almost, when we get really planar for me, um, it actually, for me, the game, and I like it in its place, but it almost is coming closer to sci-fi for me sometimes when for some reason the planes feel more that direction than it does fantasy. And that's me. I don't want to like put that on everybody, but it kind of bridges in a little bit for me where
For
you
me,
get
it
to,
depends if it's elemental or
mm,
religious in some sort of way. So,
right.
like those areas of hell, or like
Hmm.
fire realms,
Yeah. Yeah.
or ethereal realms.
Right.
Even that all feels still fantasy to me.
Okay.
I'm not sure what would feel sci-fi.
Yeah. I think for me, it's when you get to places where maybe people from different planes are interacting like peacefully. It feels like
The
Star Wars when
Galactic
you're like
Empire.
in the you're like you're in I don't know enough Star Wars, unfortunately, but you're in the bar
The
with all the
J.R.R.
aliens.
Tolkien guy who was
Sorry.
like Lord of the
Um,
Rings now
I
shows the
Yeah, yeah.
part where he has no knowledge.
I enjoy Star Wars. I don't know what to say, but you're in the bar and all the aliens are there, kind of thing. So I'm
Right.
I'm I'm diverging, but I think there's like a place, like I'm just trying to say, with like your scope of your game, what the theme is, and um, for me, like I do like having that to be there, but I definitely, for the most part, fall into that like here or there, and here is very detailed and there is kind of nebulous generally kind of thing. But in my my more recent game, the way it's played a role is more, the point being what's trying to be getting across, gotten across, is more about like what's going on with the gods than it is with really trying to make a detail of like the land out there, kind of thing. And it's not played a huge role in the like micro story for you all, or a lot of being talked about. And I'm trying to figure out how much to give there, but um, there's a semi like in the back of my mind with all what we're doing right now. There's a semi like creation story in some ways taking place that's kind of driving some of the things. And what the players do know is, that there were titans that were ravaging the land and they were bound by those gods, but then those gods left their avatars but kind of pulled out of the prime the prime plane kind of thing. And that's about all they know, but all that but that there is this place of like, okay, where are they residing, and is that accessible, and those are kind of questions I have to ask myself in that too. In past games, there have been things where I really like the idea of things being bound. So I guess sticking with this game, there was that point where you all kind of got a glimpse of the fire plane through a little teleport box kind of thing. And you also connected that with one of the titans that you managed to see the bindings of, knowing that that's like connected there, and so the fire plane definitely is connected to the game and has been seen and experienced to really small amount kind of deal. But I kind of going back to that, I really like things that are like imprisoned, bound, or exiled. Like those things for some reason always grip me as like a storyteller. So I have the thing like the Titans being bound. My other game, the Impending Doom, it was an ancient dragon that was trying to be released, kind of deal. Or in my first game, it was connected to like a powerful item that had been kind of thrown into there. Using that term again, it's like it's out there somewhere,
Right.
like we got it out of our world, and but now people want it back, kind of thing. And so a lot of times like planes play that role for me. I think even more so than like the travel, but there is that place for that too.
Yeah, I think you said something about like most of the time you deal with any kind of planar stuff, it deals with the gods. I think that happens for me too, probably because it's a very not sci-fi, a more fantasy
Right.
sort of idea. The
Mhm.
thing that I think about when I think about planar is that these places are not places you go permanently. They're not
Mhm.
places you go long term. They're very
Mhm.
temporary because things from one plane do not belong in other planes. And it's the
Mhm.
same with them visiting here. I think for me, very, 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 very few things, and maybe that's what makes it part of the story, is it's so rare.
Mhm.
Very few things come from a plane and spend any amount of connected time on this
Mhm.
plane. Um, it's usually a visit and gone sort of thing.
Okay.
So if
Yeah.
something's here longer, and it's the same when we go there, like man, material man was not meant to live in a fey world because
Mhm.
logic and reality is different there.
Right.
And the same thing if you go to, obviously a fire plane is a place you don't spend any time unless you have some powerful magic keeping you safe. That's not going to last forever. You're there for a little bit and then you get out. In my game, I think I had a bit of it, at least the lore of it, that was in the celestial plane. If you remember, there was a battle in the celestial plane And
Yeah.
part of that celestial plane was cut off and thrown down into the depths of hell. That became Occipitus, right? And it was all because there was this being who had begun making these raids down into hell, and he had been down there so much and spent so much time making these raids as like this great righteous person that he then was turned somehow, and he led a revolt up into heaven, and
Right.
they almost didn't get it stopped. And the only way they could was to cut off this realm, throw it into the depths of hell, and it became Occipitus. And you guys got some of that, but
Yeah.
even if you went to the celestial plane, you would not stay in the celestial plane because
Mhm.
that's not where a human belongs, and you cannot kind of stay
Yeah. Yeah.
coherent
Yeah.
as a
Right.
human in the celestial plane for long before you then lose your material and you become just a celestial being, a
Mm.
soul of some sort.
Yeah.
Same thing if you would go to hell. You can't stay there forever. You don't just go down and say, I'm just going to live. Although one of you in our party became the Lord
Yeah.
of
That's true.
Occipitus,
That's
which
true.
is this place that maybe can be restored to a celestial place, depending,
Right.
because whoever is the Lord of it influences like the way it manifests.
Mm.
Anyway, all that to say, all of the planes that I could think of, they're places that are very temporary,
Right. Yeah.
but there is this idea that there's a lot more there, and you guys have to figure out how much can you stay there before it starts to affect you. Or as the GM,
Yeah.
I get to help decide some of that. How long
Right.
can you guys stay there before it starts to affect you, and then what does that affect? And
Hmm. Hmm.
I think planes are fun to play with, and I would love for one of our viewers who is really into planar stuff and cosmology, who uses it a lot in their campaigns,
Hmm.
to drop. We said we kind of come from a less planar,
Right.
less
Yeah.
cosmologically diverse sort of gaming master scenario.
Hmm.
We mostly play in the material plane with some jaunts here and there.
Right.
And like I said, with this last game, I have gotten a little more thought of how some of those planes begin to affect our encounters in our
Right. Right.
campaign. But somebody who does like that a lot, somebody who did pick up that cosmology and planar book and read it back, cover to cover, and just like
Hmm.
got so inspired that they built like whole campaigns about planar traveling and whole campaigns about like what happens if you're here or here and where is everybody at. I'd love to hear, some of your just experiences, or
Right.
some of your thoughts on this, because we're not going to be experts at everything, although we're pretty expert at a lot, right? We're not.
uh,
We just love to talk. But yeah, it is nice to hear from people who are
yeah.
more expert
Absolutely.
than we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of my favorite parts of planes is that discovery. We talked about the 8 types of fun a while ago. Hey, by the way, this is episode 26.
26,
That means we have been doing this for 6 months, for half a year, right?
half a year. There's 52 weeks in a year.
Yep.
Boom, halfway.
Boom.
We wanted to
So
make that. We wanted to mark that. We talked about it a couple
yeah,
times ago, and
yeah,
I totally forgot that
yeah.
this was 26.
It's awesome. So thanks all for being with us through this. But looking back at, it was episode 8 was the 8 types of fun, and that discovery idea. I think I like that a lot as a player. Like I get to discover all the more when we like go into planes. So that's a fun piece of that too, of just like the exploration. We were in Occipitus. It's like, man, what's going to be around the bend here, and it's probably going to be gross, but
It's going to
like
be a slapping skin fold sea that you're going to fall into.
oh man. But that is a fun piece of that. So kind of like turning a little bit, because we've touched a little bit on like gods and deities and things like that in our games. um with that, I definitely lean that way, to having those like entities in games a lot. And uh I think it's worth having a little bit of a convo about that too, of like how we use gods, how we use deities. And I'll be the first to say, for me, like I kind of like slap things together. A lot of times I have too many influences and I've played too many systems, and it gets confusing sometimes of like, wait, who's in this? And um I just chalk that up to, this is the world we're in, of like, if I accidentally pulled a Pathfinder god into a bunch of Forgotten Realms ones, it's gonna just be fine. But that's me. Again, I'm not necessarily needing to be that specific with what I do. But the I feel like that, especially in the kind of driving maybe a quest forward a lot of times, lately for me at least, has been, if nothing else, like the oracle idea of giving wisdom to like what's the next step kind of thing. This game right now we're in, they're playing a very large role because of these avatars and the way that they have bound this Titan, even to the point of like giving boons and that kind of thing. I think it's been a help for me to like push the story along and like help there to be like information that's dripped, at those times that we've talked about when you interact with them. And I really like the even like connection to like a specific like player story. Right now it's like Pip with Saluni, that we talked about last time, but that there can even be like that kind of thing happening. So you talked, about the like the old gods in the Dormant Mind game, and how that, like, for me was a big like reveal of like understanding, oh yeah, these are things I know. Josh is in the chat, and I'll give a shout out to Arafel. His character is like connected deeply in that way. But is that like, does that tend to be a pretty strong thing for you, Matthew, with like just bringing in like deities and things like that? Or is it kind of, I guess, how have you done that?
So not every game,
Mm,
a lot of games. So if you remember back the Oracle of Order, it was about prophecy. It was about the emperor. It was about madness, but it was all human.
right.
I don't think
Hmm.
there was any gods anywhere in that one.
Mm,
And really, it wasn't until I got to this one, like the Blood of the Kings, the Nine Moons. There was no gods there. That was just,
mhm.
they found a way to teleport to these different places, and there was
Right.
manpower, men in power in different places, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was this one that I really started playing a lot with gods and the planes and those ties to that. And I would say that it depends on your character. Certain characters love the idea of like having a connection,
Mm,
being the favored champion of a
yeah.
god,
Right.
or
Right.
being like the vessel of a god, or having some sort of secret, not secret, but some sort of communication
Right.
that they can, have with the gods. So
Hmm.
Josh with Arafel, or Kyrus, I should say, has
Cars.
played
Yeah.
with Arafel in this one. And I think Chris's character in most of our games loves that same sort of
Mm,
thing. So he played a guy named Silas in one of your
yep.
games, who was this, who was he? His god was the sun god. I can't even remember.
Paylor, maybe. Maybe
Palor.
did
Yeah.
Paylor. Yeah.
And then now, Pip has,
Right.
he's actually gotten with a couple different right ones, Havilar and then Salona.
Oh, yeah.
Havilar is
Yeah.
not really a god, but anyway.
Right.
But like in even in my game, I think that is something that's of interest to him strongly. But then there's others who just they like that the gods are out there, but they're not looking to make any connection to a single god. They don't mind having encounters with them, being important enough to be noticed by the gods, but they're not the kinds of characters that get
Right.
like an identity piece from this connection to a
Right.
god. And I think that that's some of our players too. And so I think, just like anything, players are all different, and different things matter to them, and different things make it fun. So for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
exploring these
Right.
celestial planes is one thing, but you're not necessarily looking to, when you met Arafel, you didn't like think, oh my goodness, I am like her number one disciple, and she
Yeah.
is going
Right.
to communicate through me.
Yeah.
So poor Josh, she's actually communicating through Sylvia, right?
Yeah.
Although Josh's character Kyrus has made an impression in her godhood mind, she
Yeah.
does recognize who he is. She has communicated with him, I believe.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
there is hope yet. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a good point too. Like, even, if it's playing a role in your game, that remembering those player types and what they care about, is like, I don't need to push like, oh, you're going to be the vessel of this person, if they're like, I just really want to crack orc skulls with an axe. Like, it's like, cool,
right.
let's like, and just paying attention to that. So that is a good point in that, for
But
sure.
like there was a game, and I don't remember who ran it, Might have been you. I'm trying to think,
Mm,
but anyway, the Raven Queen was a big part. It was when I was
mhm.
I think a tiefling. Anyway,
Yeah.
like I really took like a an identity piece from that. I began
Mhm.
to think, oh yeah, because she was all about. I'm trying to remember now. She was all about like death happening the proper way.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so anything undead was an abomination to her and like these people who were doing something. And I like made it, it became like a
mhm.
big mission of mine to kill the magic people for, and the people who were causing this undead because
Right,
I
yeah,
was identifying so strongly with like the fact that there had been, I don't know if there was even a visitation or somehow I had
yeah,
gotten connected with the Raven Queen, and that just seemed
mhm.
cool to me. And so
Yeah,
that
right,
began to influence the way I developed and the things that became important to my
yeah,
character. So
yeah,
again, we're getting into gods
mhm.
because in that game, I don't think I did any planar. I never saw
Right.
into
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
godly
yeah.
plane or anything like
Mhm.
that. But that's the next step, I think, is to sometimes be kind of called into that plane or to have them visit this plane. And
Yeah.
again, I don't know enough about the. I do think that there's a place for the person who's like, hey, I want to make sure that cos cosmologically and planar, I've got all the right gods that are in this
Mhm.
system,
Yeah,
and I know how they all relate to one another, and
yep,
that's part of the fun for them is playing within that system. And then there's people like
absolutely.
you and me who are like, hey, this person seems awesome. I know they're from like Pathfinder. I'm going to shove
Yeah.
them in here. And then this
Mhm.
person's from a video game that I once saw. I'm going to make them
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
god. And I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah,
take this
right.
person and here's all your gods.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
it's good. It's good both ways, just depending
Mhm.
on you as a GM. And that's part of it is you
Yep,
figuring out who am I as a GM? What do I love?
yep, yep. Yeah, put that together, be consistent. Yeah, there's lots of opportunity. If you're like digging into that, man, I want some planes involved in my game, or to bring in some of these like deities from these games. Like there's uh, so many resources out there. You can pull that up online pretty easily and find that. Do some reading and let it spark interest. And let kind of drive you forward into like what's actually good for my game, what's gonna be gripping for my players, kind of thing. So yeah,
Definitely, definitely let this be part of your world building, though. As you're planning everything at the very beginning, think about how am I going to introduce cosmology and planes.
yeah, yeah,
With that, though, I think we're going to move on to our NPC for the
absolutely.
day. This person that you could drop into a game, and we got us a good one today. Who is it?
Yes, this is Gerard Marriott. I'm gonna give him Gerard because he's got two R's instead of Jared.
Gerard.
Gerard. He's the charismatic pretender, and I can only assume this is a Friends reference.
I can't think it's anything else.
How you doing?
That's
With a
his.
capital U.
That's his line. He would say, "How you
How
doing?"
you doing? Little Joey Tribbiani there. But his appearance, his dazzling smile and long locks of golden brown hair make women weak in the knees. Twinkling green eyes show a hint of amusement. Breeches complement a silken blouse, which reveals a manly, hairy chest. um, Role playing. Gerard is quick-witted with an easy air about him. A disarming smile is always on his face, and nothing seems to bother him. Outwardly, he's a flatterer and a smooth talker, but underneath, Gerard is playing for his next big score. He gives a good story, but's quick to fold under pressure. He has a few scruples. He has few scruples beyond ensuring his own survival. Apparent lack of intelligence is just a play on his part. His motivations are that he is a swindler and a con man. He'll sell anyone into the dungeon if it'll advance his financial position. Lecherous, he uses the affection of others to advance his personal gain. He's charming and handsome. He has a penchant for being both recognizable and forgettable, depending on his needs. He floats from alias to alias with practiced ease, going from one erstwhile lover to the next, all the while cleaning out their purses. His sordid background has made him a jack of all trades. He slides into assumed roles with little difficulty, and underneath it all, he's unashamedly a coward, though, and he will readily admit it. A lover, not a fighter, he flinches at the mere mention of violence. He's well connected with the word on the street. So that is Gerard Marriott.
I like that last
Yeah.
line, the connected
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the word on the street. That's where I would begin to use this guy. And they, whether they intended it or not, by saying, how you doing?
Uh,
It's going to be hard not to think of him as a Joey
yeah.
Tribbiani sort, even if he has long locks and green
Right.
eyes, which
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think Joey
No.
had. I
No.
don't know if I could tell you about the eyes, but this idea of kind of like, I mean, you think of Joey, he never came off as like the smart one, right? It was always like he was saying something and everybody's like, Joey, and they're looking at him and he's like, what? Or I think this could be a fun guy to play.
Yeah.
And he's a fun guy because, yeah, the looking for his next score is not always the best, selling anybody into a dungeon for money.
Right.
But the idea that he kind of is connected with what's going on in the world, that's always helpful in an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he can be like charming and yet like a little bit clueless, that can be fun to play in a game. And it can like help him find out stuff that your characters need to find out.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Fun role playing with PCs if you get to, if you can embody that NPC. So just go watch a bunch of Friends episodes and then like take a look at somebody with like long blonde hair and green eyes and kind of marry the two and play that.
Yeah. I really liked the line that he can be recognizable or forgettable was in there. Like I liked that line a lot, of just that idea of him being able to float in those ways of like being kind of the party, I think, in some ways, and like just everybody loves him kind of thing, or can kind of move through the crowd and not be remembered, kind of. I liked that idea of like a true con in that way. I wondered, like, I was something I was thinking about this week as I was thinking about this guy is what it would be like. So I think the way it's written, it's just like a human, like I kind of think of him as a human as far as that, but like the role of like a shapeshifter and someone like this, and what that would do, like, does that make it, and maybe this is going a little too like in the weeds, but does it make it is he less interesting because he can do it so easily if he's a shape, like a changeling or doppelganger or something like that? Or is that like bring an interest level to it in your mind? I've been trying to like kind of think through that of like, would it be more interesting if it turned out to be someone shapeshifting and that's why they can be so charming, or are they cooler because it's just a dude but he's good at what he does? Kind of. I don't know, what do you think about that?
I have a love of shapeshifters and changelings, doppelgangers all around. Always fascinating to me. And I don't think you can use too many of them.
Everyone's a changeling.
I don't think there should be a lot in the world.
Right.
I think what makes a doppelganger or a changeling like so terribly interesting is the fact that there's like hardly any, if any, of them that anybody even knows about. Because if everybody was, who cares? Everybody could be anybody. But I don't know. I think it'd be okay. I think the hard part here for me is keeping him differentiated from a bard. Because anytime you see somebody who's like charming and, good looking, and that's kind of what I always think of when I think of the bard. The bard is that guy. Right. He's got the face, he's the face from A-Team. He's Face Man. He's the guy who's like always out there. He's like trying to charm everybody. He's never Murdoch. That's not the bard. The bard is the charismatic guy. And so it would be, for me, keeping this guy somehow separate from the bard. And maybe it's that he is, thicker and more burly and has a more hairy chest than your typical bard. But, when they say he wears a silk blouse and breeches, I'm like, it's starting to sound like a bard.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
A person like in the game not Dormine, Jade Masks game, there was a guy that you guys came across he was a magic user, and he was an enchanter kind of thing of enchanter. He was doing like basically enchanting people to whether it was like domination or just charm, was the kind of thing. But
He was
you
Jim
all,
Jones and a bunch of people, right?
yeah. I mean, you guys, they really didn't have any choice at all, of like this kind of brainwashing that was going on. But when you went to that like trading post that was on the edge of the kingdom, and show up, and like everybody's just kind of mindlessly, except for the kids. The kids were immune to it, and that's kind of how it came out, was like, no, they're acting really weird ever since that guy came, kind of thing. And that was really interesting. I think about that guy in terms of the way that this seems like it plays too. Of he had some like natural charm, but that natural charm led to him being able to use the magical charm that he had, and like how that could kind of, because he was just living it up, like, well, got my own personal place to live and food on the table, and everybody just does my bidding, kind of thing. And so I think that could be an interesting like antagonist, but not necessarily. Again, this isn't one of those. He's not going to fight you. The way this is
Right.
written, it's like as soon as the swords come out, he's like, nope, I'm done. It's like I got nothing.
I give. What do you
I'll
guys
walk
want?
away, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, what can I give you? So, which I think is sometimes refreshing too. It's like not everybody should fight to the death every time you put them against, kind of thing. People are gonna give up. People are gonna run away. People are gonna just choose not to because they're scared, or smart. In a lot of cases, as your players get more experienced and higher level, it's like more people should be not trying to fight these people, because they're just too powerful. But yeah, I thought he was pretty interesting. One more thing, I just think he once again could fit into that encounter, that we talked about earlier. Of this easily could be, especially when you're talking about people who are fake fighting monsters. It's not really a battle that's happening. They're just
Mhm.
acting like it. Sounds right up a guy's alley who, wants to con everybody and refuses to fight. And maybe if he's a changeling, he comes from a different plane. So we just bring it
Oh,
all together.
look at that. Tying it up with a bow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I never thought about that, but yes,
Mm,
very much could be part of that adventuring
yeah.
party, and
Right.
good NPC. Good NPC
Yeah,
to drop into a campaign, again, to use or to have
for
as
sure.
part of your repertoire.
Yeah,
What do we got in the
absolutely.
haversack this week, Adam?
We have a lot in the haversack, and some
Haversack
of
is
it,
full.
apologies to anybody who we don't get to. Josh mentioned reminds me of the professor who teaches dark arts in the Chamber of Secrets. I actually thought about that. It's I cannot remember his name either, but he's like the charmer guy. Let's see, finish Aura 438. I found shapeshifters work best a neutral player. Villains, I found they are difficult to maintain, especially once the party finds out. Yeah, an unknown party, uh, it's led to good games. That's a good point there too, of like letting them kind of be neutral and more mysterious rather than that. I remember one time having, I think it was a doppelganger that ended up being like, there was a fight and it was like, well, this is kind of lame. Like once it went to the fight, it was like, this is not actually fun anymore. So that's a really good point there. Thank you. Um, Haversack. Yeah. So we're a little tighter on time today, but so apologies if we don't get to your question, because it is bursting. I never knew that a haversack could be so full. Um, we'll jump in here. We've got to start out. We've got one from Josh Morton, and he's asking about CR. So we got the short of it is, how does CR work? He says, "Hey guys, question of the day. I've been helping one of my players, Taylor, out in starting up her own campaign, which is awesome. Good job doing that, helping her along. That's cool that Taylor's starting that. But he says, I'm struggling to explain how CR works within the realm of 5e. Can you help us out and explain this for us? Thanks, Joshua Morton." I don't know. So I laugh because things I'll say is like, I will never feel like CR is not an exact science in my brain by any means.
It's a
There are so many,
guideline.
it's a guideline, and there are so many variables to it. And like looking back, and I'm probably going to get corrected on some of this stuff, but so we kind of came in 3.5 to D&D, and it was interesting to me when I first started running, thinking in terms of, I was like, oh, this is a CR 10 monster, so my 4 10 level characters should be able to go against that, which is true. But then realizing later that there was this understanding of like, well, that's not just like hope they have a 50% chance of surviving this. It's like, no, what it's actually supposed to do is take like 20% of the resources. And that like totally was like, oh, well, that makes a lot more sense of why they're like destroying these people. But yeah, they use like 20% of their spells or their HP or their whatever kind of deal. And I think it's important to like remember some of that too when we're thinking about CR. Is it's not like, okay, if I have a 5th level party of 4 people and I put a CR5, then it's going to be this massive brawl. It may not be, kind of thing. So it gets a little weird, especially you start giving out items. If you play it a certain way, depending on abilities, like that's going to be lesser or tougher, kind of situation. Where do they fight them? Have they already dealt with some things prior to this? Or is it the first thing and the only thing for the day? That's going to look different kind of deal. So there's a lot of variables in there, but I like to bring that idea, even if I've not specifically seen it in 5e stated, and maybe, and I just haven't seen it, where it's that idea of like 20% of your resources is eaten by this. That may not be exactly the way they're thinking. But I do think the idea of the guideline is good, where it's like, okay, I'm going to start kind of testing the waters maybe as a new GM and putting up this CR level against my players and see how they do. And I think there's some ways to tweak that too. But like Matthew, I saw you lean forward, so I wanted to give a spot there for a second.
Yeah. Oh, the old lean gives you my nonverbal. I think a big thing when I was first starting was I had this idea that, okay, like you said, okay, I've got 4 5th level characters. I'm going to find, okay, a 5th level monster. Boom, I put that in. Oh, they beat that so easy. That doesn't seem right. So I'm just going to increase that CR and I'm going to get it. So I get, a higher CR and they still beat it. And I wasn't thinking about a couple things. One of them was that it's supposed to be that you run through an amount of resources meaning their magic and their health points, how much they're going to have left. So some things to think about. Don't give your characters a rest after every single battle. Oh, you fought a battle, sleep for a day. Fought a battle, sleep for a day. Because part of a CR is it accumulates. You're going to have to go. You do this battle. You're down some spells and some hit points, and then you go along and you run into some more things, and then it gets more and more tricky. And so they have to be careful. If you give them a rest after every single battle for a whole day, they're never going to feel a challenge rating of their level. Secondly, it's not just about one big monster every time, which is what I did when I first started. Here's one big monster. Here's another big monster. But it changes depending, you can have something with a lower CR rating, but if you have 4 or 5 of them and they're working together, that's going to be harder because you can only attack one thing at a time. If you have one thing and everybody's attacking it, that thing only gets one attack. That's going to be much different than even if you have 3 things of a lower level and everybody attacks one of those things, but they all get attacks back. So there's 3 attacks coming back instead of 1 attack coming back, and maybe more depending if they, how they fight. So knowing how to mix up, and I'm going to tell you that even though the challenge rating kind of gives me a starting place, it's never the end for me. I have to experiment all the time. So, I throw in, 4 or 5, 2nd level things. And then I throw in, 2 3rd level things and then a 5th level thing. And I'm like, okay, what will happen if I throw all this at my characters? Well, maybe that's too much. And I see it in the middle of the fight. I have to be able to adjust to that somehow in the way I do tactics. Or I get there and it's not enough. I have to know, how do I bring more into this next time when we're fighting? How do I? And of course, this is all going to depend also on how liberal of a GM you are at giving
Mm,
out extra gifts,
right.
stuff,
Yeah.
somebody who just sticks right to the level chart and gives you no extra magic items and gives you no extra feats and stuff like that. They might be able to depend on that a little more. But I've always been the guy who I think part of rewarding my players is giving them extra magic things and extra
Right.
weapons and extra feats and this and that. And then at some point they're going to get so powerful it doesn't matter. You're going to be throwing monsters that are a much higher challenge
Yeah. Yeah.
rating
Yeah.
at them, and they're
Right.
still going to be like taking care of them. And you have to remember, yes, this is just one fight of many, and this is some of their resources. And there's times where you want them to fear death, and you're going to like have something that's so much higher than them,
Yeah.
and they're going to be like, "Oh my goodness, we barely made it out alive."
Hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of things that go in, and I know I just threw out like a ton of different permutations, but
Yeah.
challenge rating is really one of those things that as you do more, you begin to get a better feel
Hmm.
for the makeup of an enemy party. They're not
Yeah.
always a party, but like the
Right.
enemy battle
Yeah.
that comes.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, just I'm looking at the chat here, but with Thai Hotel, this makes our salt marsh stuff make a lot more sense. It's been quite a grind of a dungeon. Yeah, I think some of that understanding helps just to kind of understand how those play. Fiendish Aura, I see CR as a useful tool, but not as an end all be all.
Right.
Yes, had five. I love this. I had five. First, sorry, I had five level 5 players almost died of 3 ghouls, and after that had a session before we killed a young dragon. It's up to the
Yeah.
dice as well. And that
Yep.
again, that's those variables. I totally agree. And Taylor, still kind of new player, brand new DM. Sorry if I missed it, but what's the jumping point for figuring out what CR you should use? And that's I don't know if this is the Taylor. Hey, awesome that you're jumping in if you are, and either way, awesome that you're a new DM. So welcome. But the really basic idea is it's like CR is if you have like 4 third level characters, then like a CR3 would be a balanced encounter for that. So if this is probably not right, but like an ogre, kind of thing. If an ogre is a CR3, that'd be a nice challenge according to the CR rules for 4 third level characters. So that's kind of the basic jumping off. But again, we're all kind of agreeing it's a good tool, it's a good guideline, but there are a lot of variables that go into that. And something I would recommend, even more than just trying to like calculate it out. There's a couple resources. One is that even like in D&D Beyond, if we're talking 5e specifically in this question, D&D Beyond has a beta like encounter builder, and I actually don't agree with the way that it calculates for my game, at least. Like, I tend to give out a lot of gifts and they're overpowered probably, but it doesn't always match up the exact way. I probably throw a lot more quote deadly encounters at them than what you should, but they deal with it fine. But the beta thing is a pretty good help to the guideline. It helps to kind of understand how enemies compound, where it's like, 2 CR3s, what that kind of becomes, and how like deadly it would look to your party. So that's a way to use that. A thing I have not used but looks like really helpful, and it's kind of in the same vein, is actually called Kobold Plus Fight Club. You can just Google that, Kobold Plus Fight Club, and it's a way to like throw in just different monsters and things like that, and it kind of adds up like what that looks like. And if you're a GM, a DM that wants to use like XP specifically as like leveling up and things like that, that's really helpful too, because it even generates the XP that would be like, if I have all these level 4 characters and I put them up against these, here's the XP, it kind of spits it out. So that's like a super helpful tool online that I would highly recommend, like using one of those kind of things. I don't know if you've brought up your like the Pathfinder thing before. Did that kind of do that too, Matthew, when you were
Yeah.
using
So I
that?
had a separate program called Combat Manager, and they made one for Pathfinder, and they made one for D&D 3.5. And when I say they, I mean a guy somewhere made this,
Yeah.
put it up. It was a pretty small little program. I think it was free, but I don't know if he's continuing that with, as
Mm,
D&D has moved online and they've got all their other stuff. But it was nice because, yeah, you could throw in whatever sorts of CR monsters you needed. And if they weren't enough, you could like elevate them. You could raise their CR
yeah,
by
yeah.
either raising their hit dice or putting a giant template on. You just
Right.
click that and it would change all the stats for you. And it was
Mhm.
pretty handy.
Yeah.
I wish he was still doing stuff like that because for me, I like the flexibility of being able to change things
Right.
and he made that possible. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I think though as a GM, the big thing is don't be afraid to build in that flexibility yourself. If you're playing and it seems like your people are just beating down the enemies,
Mhm.
that's not very fun. As
Yeah,
fun as it sounds, sometimes it is.
yeah.
Like we have one guy who he just wanted to like wipe out swaths of people with one hit, and
Mhm.
so I put him on this roll with 300 kobolds, and he
Right.
just went crazy as a wizard, just like blasting,
Yeah.
killing them, and that was fun for him. But sometimes if it's too easy, that's not fun. If it's too hard, that's not fun. And so as a GM, keep your finger on the pulse of the game and the players.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you just totally nerf the monster if it like if they're sometimes they have to be afraid for their life and they have to know
Mhm.
to run or
Yeah, yeah.
die,
Yeah.
and that's okay too. But sometimes you don't want that to happen, and so you need to know how do I with tactics make some of the enemies like give up at a certain point or
Right.
run at a certain point instead of fighting to the death everything, or how do I know when this is too easy and so I have to bring in other monsters, something kicks down the door and like five more flood in, because I need that because they're
Mhm.
just wiping the floor with them. So
Yeah.
as a GM, don't be afraid to like do what you have to do to make it fun. Remember, the whole ultimate goal of this thing that we do called gaming is to build fun stories together.
Yeah.
And it's no fun if they just beat everything with no trouble, and it's no fun if they die at the first hit of everything
Yeah.
you bring to them. That's no fun either. So it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And as a GM, when you're first starting, it's a little feels a little bit more daunting than it is, but just start by plugging in some things that seem about right CR
Right.
wise, and then think, okay, I can adjust
Mhm.
this on the fly if I have to. I can bring in more. I can
For sure.
I can give this thing a few more hit points than it had to start. That kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, that's a good, I think kind of to end here before we have to jump off, like Phoenix Aura brought up that opinion on changing health for monsters. When it comes to little fights, I use set health bosses. However, the death is when the fight seems to begin to be dull. I found it keeps the fight fun, and
Right.
I do like I'm agreeing, with both of you too. Like I think there's points, and I have a little bit of a head canon in that too. Maybe I'm just trying to justify, but I'm like, not every human can take a punch the same way, and like maybe not every goblin has 7 health. Some of them have
Right.
3, some of them have 12, and I do, I think like the pacing of the battle, that is a thing where you start to look around and, all right, 3 people are like twiddling on their phones because we've been fighting this, you know, whatever forever, kind of deal. And um, I think that's important to pay attention to. Of also like if they're striking the goblin and it's like, man, they needed 1 more HP, I'm probably gonna kill it. It's like, yeah, you cut it in half and you move on, kind of thing of trying to make that more dynamic than that. Or um less, I think less times, but sometimes it's like, wow, this thing's getting annihilated. Maybe we should raise the HP a little bit. So I'm willing to do that, in the moment kind of thing. But I want to be consistent with it too, where it's not just like, oh well, I'm just pulling the rug out from under people when they think they're about to win either. So I think that's important. Just for like one more thing on the CR, I think if you're building that, um, be be cool with like testing it out, trying this out. Okay, that was like super easy. We can learn from that next time, maybe know how to add things in to make it a little bit stronger. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, we got a lot of stuff in the haversack, but we're going to need to hold off
on to
until
some
next
of that.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to throw it away. The haversack can luckily hold more than it looks like. So we're going to hold on to that.
Yeah.
We are both a little crunched for time today, so we're going to go ahead and end here. But we are thankful that you guys joined us here for Cosmology and Planes. We're continuing in the world building. What are we talking about next time, Adam?
Actually, next time we're moving away from world building, but we're going to have a guest, Josh Morton, who is in the chat today, talking about new gaming experience, new jamming experience.
All right. So new gaming, new GMing experience talk with guest host Josh Morton. Next time, be sure to join us here on Rise of the GM.
Thanks all for being a part of it.